members about the initiative of community land trust. This is intended to be for informational purposes only. A lot of decisions are yet to be made with regard to how the community land trust could be set up for the city of Greensboro. So if you hear to be determined, it's because a lot of decisions around the structure of the community land trust. Should the city choose to move forward with this option of providing permanently affordable housing, will be determined at a later date. At this point in time, I would like to turn over the presentation to Mr. Jason Webb. He is providing technical assistance through us by his company, Grounded Solution. Grounded Solution is the premier provider of community land trust technical assistance as well as ongoing support. Please join me in welcoming Jason Webb.
Thank you, Unica, and thank you all for taking the time this morning and joining us on this platform here. In terms of Zoom, I'm going to be going through roughly about an hour and a half, presentation. And please use the chat feature as you have questions. We're going to hold questions to the end, but please use that chat feature if questions do come up. Let me go ahead and formally sort of introduce myself. My name is Jason Webb. I am the Community and Technical Assistance Principal at Grounded Solutions Network. I come to this work with over 35 years of experience in community development, community organizing, affordable housing, with the specialty with community land trust. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. I led one of the largest urban community land trusts here in the country called Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative for about 15 years on staff, and then an additional 10 years as a part of their board of directors. I started off incredibly young doing this work in my own community on Dudley Street. And here at Grounded Solutions, I manage all of our technical assistance engagements throughout the country. And currently, right now, we're deployed in about 22 other communities throughout the US. Grounded Solutions, we are a national nonprofit membership-based organization that specializes in lasting affordability models. Community land trust are one of those models, but other models can be deployed when it comes to lasting affordability in terms of housing. Where I like to start our conversation today in our journey is first talking about the roots of the community land trust model. Now, this model is over 50 years old, and one of the questions that we're first going to tackle is why 50 years ago, who were the people that actually came together to first form the first community land trust, and why was this model sought after for a different type of land tenureship?
There were many African Americans who were sharecroppers and tenant farmers in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Tennessee. And when they attempted to register to vote, they were forced off of the land.
So there we have the great late John Lewis that sort of sets the stage. 50 years ago, a number of farmers sort of came together and realizing that just the action of registering to vote was actually causing their sort of tenure on the land that they were working to be disrupted and for them to be kicked off of that land. Here is what we would consider to be the simple version of the roots and tracing back all where the model actually comes from. But this diagram here really illustrates an important feature, and that is that this model here has been touched by a number of different movements, social movements, here in the United States and abroad. So here in this diagram, you have movements like the US peace movement, the single tax movement, the Grand Dame movement that was over in India, and what really continues to be a bedrock of this model is the US civil rights movement. Now we're going to hear from actually one of the CLT founders as to the reason why he was compelled to come together to really look at a different type of land ownership.
I woke up this morning in my mind. Stay on freedom. I woke up this morning in my mind.
I was canvassing on the plantation. I knocked on the door of a man and his wife. They promised me they'd come to the mass meeting. They comes to the church with their 5 children. They told me that they had been kicked off the plantation, had nowhere to go for the night. How many people whose doors I've knocked on got kicked out of their homes with their children, without a job? And I was partially the cause of it. So I lived in deep guilt and frustration. So that's how the spark of the need for land came to me. Seeing the land, just the land itself, the beauty of the land, the purity of the land, and the acknowledgement that all power comes from the land, and the land comes from God. All power comes from the land. Absolute power comes from God. And that's my ministry. It's still my ministry.
So there we have one of the founders, Charles Sherrod, talking about sort of the importance of land and understanding that collective land ownership was a lot more durable in terms of protecting everybody that's there than any individually owned land. So in 1968, Charles Sherrod and a number of other folks created an American delegation that went over to Israel to actually look at a new type of land ownership model. And they were so impressed by a model that was called the Musha model that they were actually compelled to bring back all of the legal documents to really create this idea of combining individual homesteads with cooperative farming on leased land. So they understood that this was a type of land ownership model that they were seeking out for the benefit of the issues that were happening here in the United States. They also understood that creating a new type of model of land tenureship, that they needed to create a broader coalition of individuals and organizations to come together to actually create the blueprint of this new model called a community land trust. These folks here are the founders of New Communities Incorporated, the first community land trust that was established here in the United States in Georgia in 1969. So New Communities Incorporated, we know as being the first community land trust here in the US, but it's definitely was not the last, because the year right after, in the 70s, the model itself of a community land trust started to adapt to an urban context. Because remember, the first community land trust was created predominantly with an agricultural lens. But going into the urban context, it was talking about how we can actually protect lower income communities from being displaced from progress that is usually known as development. The first urban community land trust was created in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was one of the first to really spar this forward progression of the model. Now, in the 1980s, what we saw was that a number of municipalities were starting to actually figure out how they can be supportive of this model. But it's actually not quite a surprise, because in 1981, the federal government made a bold declaration that the federal government was out of the affordable housing, work, that was a local problem, and it should be funded only locally, and that the federal government shouldn't put any more money into affordable housing. The federal government went ahead and slashed HUD's budget, which has never gotten back to the levels that it once was. But 3 cities actually started to look at this new model of land ownership around collective ownership and said, we're going to support these groups in 3 unique ways. The first is actually in Burlington, Vermont. And, at the time, the mayor there, by the name of Bernie Sanders, really sort of embraced this model of collective land ownership and allowing the community to go ahead and own its own destiny. He went ahead and actually, as the city, donated a $250,000 grant for this new community land trust to get started. The second one is actually in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there was an industrial woodworking plant that was leaving the city. And the land was actually going to be sort of transferred back into city control. And this land was roughly about 28 acres of land. And the community came together and actually petitioned the city and really said to them, how about we start our community land trust with this 28 acres of land? And the city of Albuquerque took a bold step and said, yes, we'll work with you and we'll donate all 28 acres so that you can start your community land trust. Dudley Neighbors Incorporated in Boston, Massachusetts, where I'm from, also took a bold step in sort of supporting a new community land trust by allowing the community land trust to have the power of eminent domain. Now, this power is usually reserved only for municipalities, but inside Massachusetts, there was a part of the law that allowed for the city to transfer this power to a nonprofit or organization. So our community land trust in Boston is still the only nonprofit organization outside of government that holds this specific power. And we used it predominantly to purchase vacant land that was blighting our community, about 15 acres of blighted land. So in the 80s, we started to see a shift of municipalities really start to support this idea of collective land ownership and community control. But also in the 80s, we also saw heartbreak, and New Communities Incorporated initially started out with 16,000 acres of land. And in 1985, unfortunately, all of their land was foreclosed upon. Now, New Communities Inc. was started with visionaries. It started with a broad coalition of supporters, and they started off with a lot of land for them to work on. But one of the things that New Communities Incorporated could not get away from was the entrenched racist policies that was in state government, because New Communities Incorporated had to battle 5 years of drought. And while their white counterpart farmers were easily able to get government-backed loans, New Communities Incorporated every year applied for those loans and was denied every year. Charles Sherrod, one of the founders, was so frustrated that he had a conversation with the governor of Georgia and asked him straight out, why can't we get any loans? And the governor replied back to him that New Communities Inc. would get that loan over his dead body. So New Communities Inc. lost all of their land in 1985, but that's not where their story ends, because in the 90s, New Communities Incorporated signed on to a class action lawsuit, not just against the state of Georgia, but also from the federal government, specifically the USDA, to really sort of highlight the discriminatory practices that they were deploying in the 80s. The federal government quickly sort of settled the lawsuit, and New Communities Incorporated is back. And one of the things that they were able to do with their money is that they realized that their vision wasn't complete yet. So both Charles and Shirley Sherrod went ahead and actually purchased more land because they understood the power of this model. And while their vision wasn't really achievable in the 80s, it was definitely achievable now. So one of the things that they both did is they looked at where were some large plots of land that was available in Georgia. And right outside of Albany, Georgia, they found a former plantation. And this plantation was actually a very unique one because at one time it was owned by the richest man in Georgia. And it actually used to house up to 100 slaves. So the descendants of slaves wanted to make sure that they could send another message that while they were, taken out of land ownership in the 80s, that they can actually come back and do it bigger and better now. So New Communities Inc., they actually still have a working farm, and Resora is what they call their conference center, where they bring groups in and allow groups to recharge based on the beauty of the land. And as what Charles Sherrod says, all power, comes from the land, and land comes from God. And that's something that is clearly still being practiced today in their sort of property and actually throughout the country. So the founders of this model actually had a pretty defined definition for it. They considered a community land trust as a democratically structured nonprofit with an open membership and a board of directors that was elected by that membership. So the founders of this model realized that concentrated power is sometimes a ticking time bomb. So they wanted to disperse that power and make sure that the members, the community, had a lot of rights and had a lot of say in the organization. So when the founders looked at membership rights as sort of having this ability of approving bylaw changes, this idea of what's called a resale formula, which we'll get into a little bit later, the idea of disposition of assets, and then also the selling of land is something that wouldn't just be a staff or a board of directors type of decision. It would go back to its membership. In the same way that, God forbid, the organization needed to dissolve and close, again, that is not a decision that's made by just staff or board members, but needs to be made by the membership of the organization. This is what the founders believed in. Now, the Community Land Trust has grown quite a bit from its noble roots in Georgia to right now over 300 throughout the US. And you can easily double that when you think about the reach that the Community Land Trust has had throughout the entire globe. We have seen amazing growth in the 90s and also right now due to the affordable housing crisis that is crippling practically every community in the United States. The CLT is roughly in about 41 states plus the District of Columbia and in Puerto Rico. And one of the things that I love to say is that anything that you can do with real estate, it can be done on a community land trust, because it's about who gets to make those decisions. Is it somebody from the outside that may not even live in the community? Or is it the residents that actually are living there and have to deal with the day-to-day repercussions of that decision? Now, here in North Carolina, the community land trust has a very rich history, going all the way back to its first and one of the oldest CLTs actually in the country in Durham, North Carolina. Soon after that, there was one established in Chapel Hill. There is one set up in Charlotte. There is one in Asheville. There is one in Boone. There is one in Wilmington and Cape Fear. There is one that just got established last year in Concord. There is one in Raleigh. There are conversations about starting one in High Point, and we are starting sort of some conversations right here in Greensboro around, is this a model that the community wants to embrace and partner with the city to go ahead and launch? So we're going to go through right now just some of the basics of what the Community Land Trust is, what it does, and some of the mechanics of it. So a community land trust organization acquires, owns, and stewards land permanently for the common good. Community land trust, as what I said, can do anything on real estate, but it's quite known for its affordable housing production, specifically home ownership. But commercial spaces, community spaces, farming is where our roots come from, and open space can all be put onto a community land trust. The idea is that once a property goes into a community land trust, it is held there for the permanent good of that use and is never sold out of the trust. Some of the core elements of a community land trust is this idea of membership and governance, the idea of holding land and subsidy in trust, and this idea of stewardship. All three of these core elements are what create a community land trust. The classic community land trust is generally a nonprofit organization with a defined service area. This idea of a corporate membership, which is predominantly just an open membership. Anybody within inside that defined service area can become a member. And it has a very distinct board of directors called a tripartite board of directors. Now, this board of directors brings together the three major interest groups in a community land trust: the community members, the homeowners, or what we would consider leaseholders, and then other public stakeholders. It's these three groups that work together collaboratively on the board to guide the organization and to help it grow. But because 2/3 of the board are made up of community members, it is one of the main reasons why we say that the classic community land trust is the only organization that is community owned and community controlled. The community land trust goes ahead and actually deploys a ownership structure called a dual ownership structure. The individual and it's usually a first-time home buyer, will own the improvements, basically the home. The community land trust will retain ownership of the land. A 99-year ground lease is what ties the land and the home together. Now, this ground lease does three critical things. One, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the community land trust. Second, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the homeowner. And third, it talks about the resale restrictions that are put onto the home. Resale restrictions are what set the community land trust apart from other forms of affordable housing. What the resale restrictions are going to do is it's going to allow that family the opportunity to come into the home at a below market rate, enjoy the home, and then resell it again at a below market rate, but still get some return for the investment that they've put into the property. So we're going to go into a little bit more of what this resale restriction looks like a little bit later with some numbers. But first, I just want to have you guys look at a community land trust in action.
How do you increase the economic development of a neighborhood and make sure that poor people can take advantage of those improvements? Because so often what you see is improvement strategies, improving low-income neighborhoods, and also moving poor people out as part of the improvement.
When the neighborhood was really destroyed, the community came together and said, we want to be able to rebuild, revitalize this neighborhood in a way where those of us who are here now aren't going to be priced out. And so we set up a land trust to protect the affordability of the homes. And at the time that we did it, it was a pretty new idea.
The majority of the Dudley neighborhood is in Roxbury, with a part of it in North Dorchester. So the Dudley neighborhood is in the heart of Boston. The land trust primarily focuses on a 60-acre area in our neighborhood that we call the Dudley Triangle. In that triangular area, we own about 32 acres of land. We've sponsored about 225 units of affordable housing.
That 30 acres of land that had been vacant when DS&I started, it is now filled with permanently affordable homes, with parks and playgrounds and a community greenhouse. We built the last homes in the community plan during a national economic crisis, including an unprecedented collapse in the housing markets.
We went to an open house on a Saturday, and from that open house, we, like 3 weeks later, had gotten ourselves very involved with everything.
We're like the only ones attempting to buy a house.
In Boston.
The waiting is the stress.
I think the whole process is stressful. I'm a social worker. That's stressful into itself. I think house buying is the most stressful thing ever, next to giving birth.
It's a blue house, halfway down Brookford Street. Tamar's room will be on the second floor. Ayani's room is on the second floor, and then Teresa's room is on the third floor with mommy and daddy on the other side of the hall.
It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. I look forward to having a stake in the property and a stake in the community.
A community land trust is an arrangement that recognizes that the community has an interest and a family has an interest. So it splits ownership.
The individuals who buy the housing, they own the house but not the land. And the purpose of doing that is to keep the housing affordable and in the community.
These homes right here are 18 new units. It's cost us about 300 grand to build it. We're selling it for 185. Having the community really control the land will ultimately mean that the house that's on top of it will always be affordable.
A startling amount of families are on the verge of losing their homes here in Massachusetts. Last month, more than 2,800 foreclosure petitions were filed. This is the first step in the long foreclosure process.
In the middle of a major foreclosure crisis. Our land trust has been a real pocket of protection.
We made sure that any mortgage lender would be a responsible lender, not a predatory lender. As a result, land trust homeowners almost completely avoided the types of predatory loans with hidden interest rates, teaser rates, exploding payments due, that people literally next door found themselves having to pay and face, and they couldn't do it. Homes on land trust land are weathering the financial turmoil and the foreclosure crisis enormously well.
But not all the homes in the neighborhood are on the land trust.
Right next to our land trust homes, you have streets now that are being abandoned with empty homes, and that attracts crime and creates a real stress for families in our neighborhood. The foreclosure crisis has really threatened all the work we've done.
We've convened a foreclosure roundtable as a part of a strategy here in Dudley to actually bring a lot of the agencies together to talk about all of our different methods.
Down the street and walk to work, so I look at all the properties and I can see when a property is starting to go down. All the clues are there are no signs, no boarded windows, but you can begin to see it.
People with economically are riding the wave and they're just waiting for the next shoe to drop.
I think if we can map it and look at the clusters and then use some of the street knowledge, let's walk, our partners have been able to acquire abandoned or already foreclosed homes, and they're putting them back in the market. But within the context of a national economic downturn, there continue to be huge challenges for us as we do our work.
You want me to initial this thing? I don't know why I just asked in front of me. I feel like from our perspective, this is an emotional purchase journey, uprooting our family. Like, this is dramatic.
This is a compliance agreement, and basically this one says that in the event that the bank needs any documents signed, you're gonna cooperate with them in re-signing.
I see that house every day. Sometimes, every day. I told you, I said I stalked the house. Hopefully it hasn't seen me hiding in the bushes. But I've been there.
Buying into this land trust means you can't resell at market rate. That's not the intent of what these houses are for. It's for people who want to live in a community and want to be able to make it possible for someone else to be able to do what they did, start off with something affordable.
It does. Oh, wait, look. He's got something. Look at that. He's got keys. You want to be the first one to touch the keys?
No, you go ahead.
Are you sure?
I might pass out.
No, I think we should touch them.
Same time. I'm kind of thinking it's like a together thing.
All right, don't hog the key. All right.
Today is really a good day for you guys to all come back together and really to have a dialogue with the governing board that oversees the land trust. I've worked with all of you guys individually to continue to, be an open door for you guys. I know that sometimes I don't, answer my phone. I'm trying to work on that.
I'm president of the Land Trust, and hopefully we can have dialogue about some of the things that you need and some of the efforts that we can make on your behalf.
One night my alarm went off, The response time with the cops, that it took them like 25, 30 minutes just to show up. I said to my kids, if we weren't being killed, they would have killed us and gone.
That's another part of the problem that we need to solve collectively. And so the more people bring those kinds of circumstances to us, the more we can work on those together.
Some of the Brookford, Dacia Street, Rand Street families have gotten together and done a couple of meetings, meet and greet, and we looked into a neighborhood watch. We're very motivated and committed to keeping the streets safe for our kids to play in. So we've had 2 meetings, 3 meetings. You know, we're just motivated to start something.
I've been here for 17 years. I wanted stability, I wanted connection, I wanted a sense of belonging. When I bought the house, I bought into a community. And I could either sit back and complain or try to make a difference. Buying this house turned me into an activist. This was a heavy drug area, and it's not like that anymore. If you want change, you have to work for that change.
It's really, really nice to have the opportunity to do whatever you want. So we have things hanging on ceilings, we have pictures on the wall, we picked our own paint color, and so to have that freedom was amazing.
Never send a man to buy pink.
Never. With this particular house, we own the structure, but we do not own the land. It's under a land trust. And so we still have a landlord. There's still conditions on owning this house.
So the original deal was, after everybody moved in, they were gonna fence in all the yards. And first they told us they couldn't do it last year because the ground would be frozen. And then they told us that the contractor wouldn't be able to do it until next year. So we all started complaining, and finally he got another contractor. But they still haven't put the gates in, and they haven't said when they're gonna put the gates in. They actually said they have no money to do the gates right now.
If they're not gonna do it, don't say they're gonna do it. And if they're gonna do it, then do it in a reasonable time frame. You're a lot less angry and bitter if you know what's going on.
Sometimes we overpromise. There's a lot that residents want to do, have asked us to help them with, and so communicating the progress, communicating some of the setbacks has been a real challenge for us.
We created a neighborhood watch group and then partnered with the Boston police in this area.
The police are good.
They won't respond if they don't have calls, so call. And so we started calling, so they started responding. So it was good.
Now our neighborhood watching has turned into more of a, we do potlucks and we cook on the grill and everybody brings
Neighborhood fellowship.
Yeah, neighborhood fellowship.
We established a community that we feel comfortable with. And hopefully in the years, it will continue to expand itself.
So there is one community land trust in action. So the idea around permanent affordability, and this was initially said in the video, is the fact that we try to design a program that will sell a home at a lower price initially than the market. And then when the home is time to be sold to another family, again, we try to lower that price at resale compared to the market, and we can do this over and over and over again. A good example is the idea of talking through what the affordability gap is. And the affordability gap is the simple difference between what the market price of a home is and what the family can actually afford to buy. So here in this example that we're going to walk through, $200,000 is the market price of the home. The family can only afford to buy a home at a $155,000 price point. So there's a $45,000 affordability gap between the two. Now, one of the things, and it's unfortunate that we've seen, is that the affordability gap is never going to shrink. And over time, the affordability gap has only gotten wider and wider. And over the past few years, we have seen some of the largest affordability gaps in our lifetime. And it's predominantly because wages are not increasing as fast as the market price of homes. Now, this model here tries to seek a fair balance between what an individual wants and what the community wants. This idea of wealth creation with the ongoing idea of affordability, the risk that come with home ownership with the rewards that come with home ownership. The idea of asset building and affordability, we like to say, is a part of a larger continuum of different strategies. On the far side of it, you have asset building, which, you can have a strategy like subsidy forgiveness. And then on the other side, you have this idea of ongoing affordability, which is predominantly a strategy around affordable rental. This idea of permanent affordability and the idea of subsidy retention tries to stay in the middle of these two. So let's walk through an example of what this would look like from a traditional model of affordable housing. Let's say a down payment assistance grant. Now, I know that the city of Greensboro actually has one of these programs. And as my folks from the city will say, that this program it works out well and has been able to be transformative for families that have been able to do it. But let's look at what that would look like on a larger scale and compare that to a community land trust. So we have our same example of a market price of a home for $200,000. What the family can afford is only $155,000. So the subsidy that's needed to fill this affordability gap is $45,000. So for this example, we're going to create a program in our fictional city of a $45,000 down payment assistance grant program. The condition on this is that the family just needs to stay in the home for 5 years. So 10 years go by and the family is ready to go ahead and sell their property. The market has appreciated in that community by $40,000. So it's now worth $240,000. This means that these homeowners are going to be able to sell their property, for $240,000. That means that they are going to be able to get $85,000 in terms of the seller's portion of this transaction. But really what they get is an above market rate of return on their investment. Because yes, they get the $40,000 worth of market appreciation, but they also get the $45,000 grant that we've given to them because the only condition was for them to stay in the home for 5 years. But let's look at what this does for the next family that may come along around this time and say, hey, I want help to get into a home. We know that the sale price of this home now is $240,000, but the family can only afford $185,000. While wages have gone up in these 10 years, they have not kept pace where the market is. So we're going to need to find $55,000 new dollars to help this second family. Now, this is the traditional model of a down payment assistance grant. It works predominantly everywhere in the country. Most cities have this program. But what this doesn't do is it's not a permanent affordability strategy. The Community Land Trust is. So in this, in terms of the CLT model, the biggest difference is that while we still bring that $45,000 to the table, we're bringing it to the table to write down the cost of the home. So instead of buying a $200,000 market rate home, you are buying a resale restricted $155,000 home. Again, 10 years go by and the market is still increased to $240,000. But because this property is a part of a community land trust, we've put a resale restriction on it that allows for this family to go ahead and to sell it for $185,000. They will be able to walk away with $30,000 of appreciation plus any of their principal pay down that they've done for the past 10 years. Now, the reason why it came up to $185,000 is as we developed the resale formula, we looked at 10 years of where the income levels were and have they gone up, have they gone down, and average those 10 years into a percentage. For this example here, we use 2% as the appreciation factor and percentage that we are giving to this homeowner. This $30,000 they'll be able to walk away with, but $55,000 stays in the property to help the next family. So the next family comes along and they're looking for this home, and $185,000 is what they can afford. And $185,000 is exactly what the sale price of the home is. The CLT doesn't need to bring any new money to the table. This next family can actually purchase this home at a price that they can actually afford because there was $55,000 in there to lower that price based on where it would be in the market. Now, this right here is a hypothetical example, that we have created here for this. Let's actually go through what it would look like as a real life example. Now, we've asked one of our other CLTs to actually run the numbers and give us what this would look like in real life. And what they did is they went back to a 1998 buyer that they actually helped and also helped to resell their home. So let's walk through this example. So this family here at the time in 1998 was able to, they were earning $13,000 a year. They were able to save up about $1,155 to put as a cash down payment on the property. So at the time, they were actually spending on rent about $700. Based on the income, the affordable rent should have been around $475 a month. So we know this as being sort of, rent burden, that they were paying more in their income than what the affordability factor is, which is usually 30% of your income. So this community land trust went ahead and they built a home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. They were able to go ahead and price it at about $95,000. They were able to bring the $1,155 to help with the closing cost. And they were able to get the new family's principal, interest, tax, and insurance payment to $450. Now, again, this is what we talk about when we talk about affordability, is the idea that 30% of your income should be going towards your housing cost. Anything above that makes it where you are housing burden, where you are not really having an affordable house. But let's fast forward this forward. And let's look at when they are ready to sell in 2021, which is 20 plus years after they originally bought the home. The resale price of this home was $147,000. So they were able to go ahead and pay off their mortgage, which was $90,000. They were able to take care of the closing costs of $5,800. They had some repairs that needed to be done to the property. So that was $11,000. Cash at closing, the money that they were able to leave the closing table with was a check for $40,200. And some folks would say that, oh, that's a pretty good return. But let's also break down this wealth creation in a few different ways. Let's remember that this family here came to the table with $1,155 as their down payment. They had a $450 monthly payment on their mortgage, which based on their income at the time was an affordable rent, was an affordable payment. But let's also take a look at, because they bought into this home and that they weren't spending the $700 in monthly rent, what would be those savings? That is roughly about $51,000 in rent savings from no longer renting, but actually owning their property. They also had a beautiful home that they loved. They were able to bring out of the closing $40,200. So from our math standpoint, they actually had a $91,300 financial benefit, because it wasn't just the cash that they got at the closing table, it was the years of not paying that $700 rent, but really paying only $450 that we should take into consideration when we think about wealth creation. But let's look at what this meant for the next family that purchased this home. So in 2021, this next family came along. And again, this next family was earning about $37,000. They were renting at the time of about $2,100. And again, we have the same house that they bought from the initial buyers. And they bought it for $155,000, which meant that they could actually afford a payment, insurance, taxes, and interest of $1,040. That means every month that this family stays in this home, compared to renting, they are saving $1,059. On a yearly basis, they're going to be saving close to $13,000, $12,780. So again, these are real numbers, a real transaction. This family here just bought their home in 2021. So we'll see what this looks like in the future. But this is where we also have to take into account that we want folks that are renting to go into a home ownership structure that will have lower payments, where there is additional wealth creation based on that difference. Now, one of the key components to a community land trust is this idea about stewardship. The community land trust is a permanent partner for as long as that family wants to own the home. The community land trust is there to help serve them. And they do this in three important ways. They don't just help homeowners to get into home ownership, but they help homeowners to stay in home ownership. As a part of the community land trust, there are important protections that are built into the model ground lease that talks about the foreclosure process, that talks about if a person ever gets behind on their mortgage payment, the bank is compelled to send a notice to the community land trust to notify them, so that the community land trust can help those homeowners get out of that trouble. whether it's through a microloan, or maybe their entire circumstances have changed and they need to sell their home and go back to renting. These are certain circumstances that happen to all of us at one point, and the community land trust is there to help the homeowner. The next part is the subsidy dollars, the money that it's going to take to lower that market rate down to an affordable level. The community land trust is there to help preserve the affordability for future buyers. So the community land trust is going to be a part of all the different transactions, especially financially, that happens with this home to make sure that it is going to be affordable for the next homeowners and the next several generations. And then we talk about the home itself. And with affordable housing, we need to talk about quality construction to begin with. And then we need to talk about how we promote sound maintenance over time. Most homeowners are going to be first-time homeowners. They're not going to know certain things that are going to be needed to be done in the home around some preventative maintenance items. Again, the community land trust is going to be there to help guide them and bring resources to the table to help them. Here are some real life examples of ideas of stewardship. So we have some community land trusts that have teamed together to create a home buyer club where they go ahead and they will support folks on their journey to home ownership. So whether that is credit counseling, whether that is just a support group of individuals to know, as what Dacia said in the video, you know, home ownership, that journey is incredibly stressful. So that is something that these two community land trusts have created, this club. The Durham Community Land Trustees, which we'll see in a moment, a little bit of their history, they actually wanted to highlight, not just for their homeowners, but for the general community, that there are programs that the county has that can possibly reduce their property taxes. So the Durham Community Land Trustees wanted to make sure that that was a part of their stewardship. In Pima County, as a part of the COVID crisis, one of the things that we started to see is that as people got laid off and as people unfortunately did lose their jobs, that they could not stay in their rental and that they were being evicted. So the county worked with this community land trust to make sure that everyone understood that there were resources that can be brought to bear to help. Stewardship also goes above and beyond, and this right here is a picture of somebody's home, a community land trust homeowner's home after a tornado ripped through her community. Now, this is from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and luckily this homeowner was not home at the moment, but she was actually at the hospital giving birth to her second child. After the community land trust heard that one of the homes was actually affected by this tornado, they went to this homeowner in the hospital and assured her that the community land trust is there to help, and that the community land trust actually had a home that they were marketing and selling, that they took that off the market and actually offered it to this homeowner to go ahead and to occupy as her home was being rebuilt. The other part of what the CLT did is ask the homeowner if the CLT can be her representative with dealing with the insurance company and the contractors and FEMA and all of the other agencies that were needed to get her back on her feet. One of the CLT pioneers coined the term that the community land trusts are the developers that never leave, that we are that true partner that wants to stay in the deal to help homeowners on this journey. Now, government has an important role and can help community land trusts in a number of different ways. As what we saw, some of the pioneers sort of created the idea of helping CLTs in the 80s, and we're seeing a number of municipalities do that even today. There are two studies that were created. One was out of the Lincoln Land Institute for Land Policy out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, that talked about the city and the CLT partnership. And then recently, Grounded Solutions partnered with the National League of Cities to create a guide for local governments to follow. Both of these studies sort of highlighted these 5 important key components where government can easily step in and help with providing startup funding, ensuring that there's a project pipeline, hiring consultants and other experts to work with the CLT, actually fund the affordable housing, and then also work as an advocate on making sure the taxing of the CLT properties are done accordingly. And there are plenty of CLT and city partnerships throughout the country and also here in North Carolina that we're going to be definitely learning from. One of those is the Durham Community Land Trustees, which is the oldest CLT here in the state and is actually one of the top 5 oldest in the country. Let's go ahead and let's hear a little bit of their history.
Community land trusts are nonprofit membership organizations that take a new approach to ownership of land and housing. The 3 land trust stories in this video show some of the ways that local residents in growing numbers of communities across the United States are organizing to gain control of their land and resources and using the land trust model to create a stock of permanently affordable housing.
I was a single mother with 3 children at that time. I just gotten divorced. And I was working 2 jobs and trying to go to school and take care of my kids. And the more money I make, the more they ask for. And I remember there were times when I had maybe $15 left over to carry me on to 2 weeks. And I was getting very frustrated with the system of, trying to have a decent place to live. For me, the future was quite bleak. I just couldn't help but think, what I'm going to do this all my life. I can't get ahead this way. I almost felt like, well, maybe I should just quit, go on public assistance, and let them take care of me. Buying a house was never a dream of mine. I never thought that I could ever afford it. But I was sitting in my office one day, and I was going through the newspaper, and I saw an ad in the paper saying that if you want to own a home, here's an opportunity, no money down. I'm like, right, yeah, right. But I felt like, let me take a chance. I'm going to call. I met the executive director, and I said, well, do you have any vacant houses right now? And she said, yes. And she brought me over to Exum Street, and the house was just in repair. But I loved it. I'm a country girl. I love the old houses. I love the front porch. I went inside and it had the high ceilings, and I was like, this is it. This is my house.
The organization Linda called was the Durham Community Land Trustees, based in the West End neighborhood in Durham, North Carolina, next to the upscale neighborhood surrounding Duke University. The Durham Land Trust, like many others around the country, was started to improve and preserve the deteriorating local housing stock that had been abandoned by absentee property owners.
If you drive through Durham, you'll see there's a lot of houses that are boarded up. And that's because absentee landlords can come in. They know that there are a lot of low to moderate income people that need housing. A lot of substandard houses. They used to be called liquor houses, if you want to put it. Actually, 4 walls, windows, no heat. And people used to come and stay for a little while. The landlords didn't do anything. They never complained. A lot of people don't know that they have a voice to say, I don't deserve to live this way. They can't afford anything better, so that landlords don't have any pressure behind them to fix it up.
During the era of about 1950, the elderly people started dying out. And then that's when the landlords started moving into this area. Little by little, they took the houses over. And little by little, the younger generation sold the house and moved out this area, moved north. And little by little, the landlord took the land for little or nothing. What we want now is to make this a more family-type community like we have always had. The Land Trust got in here and they did a beautiful job. Somehow or other, they gave the people what they wanted, that was housing.
This is a typical Durham Community Land Trustee rehab. We've gutted it with volunteer efforts. We will take this house, and where there's tongue and groove hole, it'll be all new sheetrock, all new walls, new windows, new doors, fully insulated from the attic to the floors, actually blown into the walls. Everything will be new in terms of new fixtures, new kitchen, new doors. This will be back to regular height, and then the addition will be put back on the end. And after the resident selection process, we'll have a new resident move in for a home ownership opportunity. The Land Trust started work on this street and was invited in by the community with a community march that was organized to board up this house because there were drugs and other illegal activities occurring here that they wanted to restrict, which has been real typical on this street with any of the vacant houses. Since then, we have done 5 rehabs, and over time, it's really become a much more stable street. And this is typical on all the streets that we target. If we're able to get 3, 4, 5 houses rehabbed, tends to stabilize with the home ownership.
Since the Land Trust has come into this community, things have changed tremendously. We're talking about quality, affordable homes. This is a quality house. Central air, central heat, thermal windows, energy efficient. The Land Trust prides themselves on having quality, not substandards. And the surrounding community has taken note to that.
Land trusts reduce the cost of acquiring and renovating their properties and the initial purchase price to homeowners with government subsidies and private donations, including contributions of volunteer labor.
I asked them at that time was how much money do I need? About $1,500 to get in the house, to own it. And they were like, yes. They sat down with me and explained to me that I would be purchasing my home, but they would have to retain the ownership of the land. At that particular time, I wanted the house, and when I asked them why did they maintain ownership of the land, they explained to me that the reason they do that is to guarantee lifelong affordability. That should I ever decide to leave this home and move to the traditional market, that they would give this house back to someone who was in the same circumstances I would. I don't own the land, but I have full rights to the land. You know, and the one point I keep telling people, this is not a step, you're not fixed here forever. Should I move on in life, I will leave this house to my children. It will always be affordable to them.
You would have the same rights to that land as any other homeowner would. The only difference is that the Land Trust reserves the first right. If you decided to sell that house, the Land Trust would have the first right to purchase that house back from you, or we would help you find another low or moderate income person to purchase that house. And the idea behind that is to keep that housing stock permanently affordable. So that way investors or absentee landlords couldn't come in, buy that property and inflate the cost of rent so that low and moderate income people, you know, would not be able to afford it. If you want to sell your house, there's a resale formula. This formula would give you back what you had invested in the house, plus an inflation factor. But you would not be able to go out and sell that house on the open market at an inflated value.
I know that I didn't buy this house to make a profit. I made it to get ahead. I always wanted to give that another person the same opportunity that I did. This is not the traditional market. You have to understand that principle before you buy a Land Trust house. All right, man, you want to set the table for me? Yes, ma'am. You or your children must live in the property at least 6 months out of the year. I can't decide, well, I want to move to California for 6 months, so I want to sublease it to somebody. That's also part of the ground lease. You cannot do that. Land Trust has built-in safety measures too. It's meant to protect those who really need it, not those who are trying to get over on the system.
It's very different from just owning land and a piece of property that's all yours. This is ours, but it's also the community's. And so, I mean, we're not in this by ourselves, and we never will be. And if we keep the house and pass it on to our descendants, they won't be in it by themselves either. They will sort of inherit our connection with the neighborhood and with the other land trust houses.
Most of the people that I've talked to over the years have always had the impression that the Land Trust was a white-owned organization coming in and buying up all the poor folks' property and getting rich. That was a misconception I had to fight for the 4 years I was as a chair president. It took a lot of hard work, and it took a lot of getting the community people involved. If you truly think that's the fact, the only way you're going to really find out the facts about the organization is to get involved.
Quite nice. I am particularly proud of the effort that's taking place today. It's Make a Difference Day. We were concerned about having this house painted because when it was initially developed, there was not a lot of money for the Land Trust to do things with. And we were concerned about the condition of Miss Yarborough's house. So we decided, why don't we put those two efforts together if it was okay? And people agreed. So we have volunteers from the Volunteer Center here. We have people from the neighborhoods of Southwest Central Durham. And they agreed that they would come together and paint the house.
About 3 or 4 years that we know it needed something done to it. Land Trust got involved, so we got involved. Yeah. Exum Street got involved. When Land Trust got involved, we got involved too. The neighbors. That's wonderful neighbors.
And this is the final stages of it. It's been prepped to paint. And it's coming out real fine. We'll probably be through with it about 4 o'clock today.
Teach young boys how to paint. Hi, everybody. When I sell the Land Trust, I don't just talk about the fact that it's done housing. It's more than a housing corporation. It's a resource. For any problems that the community people are having, they bring it to the Land Trust. Be it whether there's the streets unpaved, there's no lights, there's safety issues they're concerned about, they bring it to the Land Trust. And you don't necessarily have to be a Land Trust owner or a tenant or leasee, as we call them. You can be anybody in the community because the Land Trust is a community organization. It's there for the entire community. You have vagrants to go in, drug dealers. We deal with all those issues. We take it to the city, we take it to the city council, we take it to the city police, bringing in all the big minds and all the big wigs in Durham to say these are issues we need to deal with people.
And I think the more we do outreach to the community and really, like I said, try to stay with people, then they're willing to come because they really feel like you have a genuine interest in them. I feel that we've had more success this year. We had our annual meeting, and we had great participation from the leaseholders, and there were some renters there. The Land Trust board is made up of a third residents, a third people in business, and then a third people in the community at large. The membership is made up of anyone who's willing to support our cause, and we have quite an extensive membership and people that support the work that we do.
I finally found somebody that cared enough to say, you deserve this. Just because you're not making a lot of money doesn't mean you don't deserve the same opportunity that other people who can afford to go out into the traditional market. And it touched my heart so that I felt like, here are a group of people that don't know me, that don't know nothing about me, and I want to give something back too. So they asked me to join the board. I always remember the first meeting I went through. They were dealing with business of, down dealing with the city council, and they were using all these abbreviations, CBGA, D money, and QID money, and I'm sitting in this meeting saying, how am I supposed to be a part of this meeting as a community person who knows nothing about housing? They walked me through the process, and maybe after about the 3rd year, I was bad. I was ready, willing, able to speak before anybody. I had totally bought into the organization because I knew what it had done for me personally, and I knew what it was trying to do for other people in the community. Talking to city officials, going down to city council. I mean, my experience with the Land Trust afforded me an opportunity I never would have been able to to receive meeting a lot of important people, but finding out that they were just like me, you know, people. They're no better, no worse. And developing a lot of lifetime friendship with people that I may not have ever had the opportunity to meet.
Housing is not something that should be traded and sold as stocks or gold or pork bellies, but it should be treated differently. So it's a very conscious statement of public policy. We have attempted to decommodify the housing stock. So rather than government doing all the thinking, people who own their own homes, many of them for the first time, are true stakeholders and have some control over their destiny.
So that right there is the Durham Community Land Trustees and a little bit of their sort of history. And, you know, this is a shot that you guys have seen, but I always love to sort of wrap up and close with this model here. You can actually do quite amazing results with it. And again, that's from my own sort of community. I used to actually walk this street to go to elementary school when it was nothing but vacant land. And the Community Land Trust was able to bring in a home ownership with these duplexes. And then further in the back, you have some triplexes that are a part of a cooperative. So this model here is incredibly flexible. And with that, I'm going to ask Unica to come back on.
Thank you, Jason, for providing such an informative presentation. This was an awful lot of information to get through, and we hope that our attendees were able to keep track and keep note. But please know that the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department is here to answer any follow-up questions that you may have. In the interest of time, I would like to ask Councilwoman Mary Kay Abuserator if she has any questions or concern, and then we will move to the questions that have already been indicated in the chat.
Thank you, Unica. No, I've learned quite a bit today, and I think it's pretty fascinating. I really appreciate the Greensboro Housing and Neighborhood Development Department for bringing this presentation. And, you know, I'd like to see if any of the residents or anyone else might have some questions, but I'm kind of soaking it all in. It's pretty fascinating, the transformation of that neighborhood, especially. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you again for your attendance. Jason, would you like for me to moderate the questions in the chat, or do you have access to them? Or
Yeah, I have access to them, which, you know, so I had one that was sort of directed directly to me in terms of just the rights and responsibilities for the Community Land Trust. Talk about this stewardship piece. So within inside of the ground lease, which is that legal document, the rights and responsibilities for the Community Land Trust is to do every effort possible to make the homeowner successful. So, you know, in terms of the clauses in there around the foreclosure, and that notices are going to be given to the CLT, and the CLT will work with those families to, you know, make sure that they have a plan as to how to get out of a default, or sort of, you know, how to transition. The rights and responsibilities for the CLT is to be available for the homeowner if they have issues or concerns. I think as what talked about in both of the CLTs in Dudley and in Durham, that this organization here is going to be, you know, focused on those homeowners and possible renters that are a part of the Community Land Trust, but are also going to be open for everybody in the community to be involved in. So those are some of the rights and responsibilities that the CLT is going to have, is to make sure that that homeowner has all of the tools that are at their disposal in being the best sort of homeowner that they can be. I know that there are a few questions around sort of like the financial business model around this for investing in building and developing. So the community land trust itself, can bring on developers that could go ahead and do the actual development on behalf of the community land trust. And then in the early days of Durham, they did it themselves with some volunteer labor and doing some rehab. So the great thing is that this model is so flexible that it can actually conform to a number of different ways. So, but I think, as what Unica pointed out, there have been no real decisions made about if a CLT is coming to Greensboro and how that would look. This is just in our educational phase of this. But for you to know, this is an incredibly flexible model, and other developers have worked with CLTs to go in and do the development where there's a developer fee and overhead that's given to them. Another question is around the lease fee for land in addition to their home mortgage. So traditionally there is a lease fee because the Community Land Trust is a nonprofit organization. It is going to have some overhead expenses. We have heard that when we were doing some community conversations that, there was pushback on that. And the good thing is that there have been no decisions made. So we can definitely look at that and try to figure out how else we can make sure that the Community Land Trust is supported from an operational standpoint so that lease fees don't need to be charged. And then in terms of the targeted areas, what happens to the existing homes and owners of those properties? So I can read that a few different ways. I would say that the most common question that usually comes up is, wait a minute, if you're selling a $155,000 home and my property is worth $200,000, is that going to reduce the value of my home? And the answer is no. There are some federal regulations put in place through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that talk about appraisal guidelines that basically mandate that appraisers cannot use community land trust homes as comparables when they're doing a value appraisal on a market rate home. So these properties here have not decreased property values. They have done a little bit of the opposite, especially if you are a community that was like mine that had some vacant lots that, inadvertently, because there was nothing on it, there was no real value to it. The moment that you put a house there, whether it's a $300,000 home or whether it's a $100,000 home, there is some improvement in that area, which means that values will sort of go up slightly. And then the other piece that was also just highlighted is that, between the two CLTs, they were looking at two different models of construction. So in terms of building from scratch, and then also from thinking of the rehab of the units. Again, those are going to be discussions and conversations. If a CLT is developed in Greensboro, what type of sort of development path is right for your area? Whether that there is some vacant land that might be city owned, that the city may want to go ahead and sort of donate into the Community Land Trust. We may want to start that way versus going after some abandoned homes and trying to get those into the CLT. Again, the great thing about this model is the fact that it's flexible, and those timelines and other pieces can easily be thought about as we're building out what the CLT will look like. To Scott's question, Troy answered that this recording here on Zoom is going to be made available, that have those videos embedded in it. What are your other questions about this model?
Feel free to raise your hand, or we'll try to just go with jumping in, but if we have to kind of moderate a little bit, raise your hand and then we'll acknowledge you.
Hi, this is Jaquina MacGyver. I'm a resident within Willow Oaks. I purchased my property when I was 25. So I've been here for quite some time. My question is, if you guys come in, and I noticed part of the video showed different things that you can do with the property, community centers, parks, things of that nature. When you come in, would the main objective be to start building homes right away, or are you going to take an assessment of the community and see what the community needs and start from there? Like, for instance, we have an issue over here where part of the community is built on a landfill. Is that going to be looked into? There's no real park for the children, so is that going to be looked into? The city has taken over our community center. Are we going to get that back? I just want to know, are these issues going to be looked at beforehand, or we're going to just come in and build houses and then don't really focus on what the community needs as a whole?
Well, the great thing about this model is that it cannot actually happen without community. It's one of the guiding principles that the founders sort of, put into it, is that, yes, the community needs to drive this and needs to figure out where it actually wants to be deployed and how it wants to be deployed. And then in partnership with the city, try to figure out where are the resources to actually take care of these issues that you are, talking about. So to me, I hate to throw it back, but this cannot happen without community. And I think that that's something that we've clearly have said when we were in person and doing the conversations, that, at the end of the day, these models here are created and supported and sort of, driven by community with the support of government and the support of a number of other supporters, like business, like philanthropic, like different institutions, but it needs to be sort of, led by the community.
I'd like to also acknowledge one of our outstanding city planners, Corey Hobson, has indicated in the chat that the Willow Oaks Community Center is not owned by the city of Greensboro. Indeed, it's owned by the Greensboro Housing Authority. Next question.
So who would be making decisions on when and how Greensboro will move with the CLT? And so we're in the phase right now of education. And, this is our fifth sort of session with sort of community to, one, educate folks about the model, get feedback. We're going to be doing some surveys and trying to get to sort of a consensus where people are at. And then we know that there's a lot of other decisions that we're going to be, again, coming back to folks that are saying, yeah, no, we want this to go. Or if we hear an overwhelming no, then it's like, okay, we're not going to invest any more time, any more money into, doing this. So right now is our educational phase. Coming out of that is going to be sort of, whether we're hearing a sentiment of, yes, we are optimistically wanting to move forward, or if we hear a great no, then that's going to be helpful as well.
Jason, I think we have another question in the chat.
Yeah, how do we get to look at the documents that organize a CLT? So again, I would say that we're going to be surveying everybody that attends each one of these and sort of asking some of the questions of, hey, do you want to participate? Do you want to be a part of some of the, advisory boards and committees that are going to be looking at all of these documents? I will say right now that a lot of the model documents are on groundedsolutions.org's website. And those are the documents that we're predominantly going to be using as templates. But again, and I want to stress this, Grounded Solutions is just a consultant coming in that has expertise in how to set these up. It's going to be, residents, community, along with the city that's going to sit around the table and be guided through a process around what the decisions are going to be needed to be made in those documents.
We also have several questions and answers located on the Housing and Neighborhood Development website related to CLTs or the Community Land Trust. But please reference those as well. I am going to put my contact information in the chat as a resource to everyone. And as I do that, please just, we're available now to answer any questions, but we realize a lot has been shared today.
So Tony, will you explain how the home sales market or average income increases, decreases may affect future transactions, land trust properties, and affect owners' ability to earn equity in their property? So in terms of mark, and does the homeowner earn equity by debt reduction, paying their mortgage? Yes. So that is by far the biggest way that you earn equity is by debt reduction. What the community, and that is 100%. 100% of that equity is what you're getting out of your home. What the Community Land Trust is trying to control is how much appreciation you're taking out of the property. And it's a balancing act because we want you to take some appreciation out of the property, but we don't want you to take the full market appreciation out of the property, because then that means that no one else can have an opportunity to start their home ownership journey with that home. The other piece is the fact that average income increases and decreases may go ahead and affect the future transactions, but that's where our expertise of looking at how the incomes have stretched 10 plus years over time, and that we do see some what we like to consider to be some peaks and valleys, and how we can flatten that out. So then at the end of the day, folks are not needing to, think about selling when the market is really, really hot. But they could possibly sell their home when it fits their sort of family planning. So one of the other pieces to this is that these properties can be heired to their heirs. So that's important to sort of think about as we think about the fact of, building an asset is around sort of this debt reduction. And how you can actually pay off the home and then pass it on to your next generation to sort of live in. And that's where a lot of wealth creation starts. So for a lot of the homes that were a part of that transformation in Dudley, a number of those homeowners own their structures outright because they've been in their homes for 30 years. And when we survey them, because they built a lot of equity in their homes, and, when we have surveyed them in the past to ask, would you want to cash out and move on? A number of them say, no, I have a unique ability now to pass this on to my kids, where the only thing that they'll have to worry about are taxes and insurance, but they no longer have this large monthly mortgage payment. That's a huge sort of, part of the budget that now can be sort of put into other wealth building opportunities. So that's something that is a part of the sales and marketing. Again, a lot of these decisions have not been made. A lot of people look at the fact that we're looking at a certain area median income level for these homes. But again, we're going to look at all those numbers if this moves forward with the group and make sure that everybody understands what some of those decisions are and what the resources are going to be needed to move that forward. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say that if this does move forward, that a part of the consulting team that will be brought to bear is the former executive director of the Durham Community Land Trustees, Selena Mack, who just recently retired last year and has gone into consulting. So that is somebody that we're looking at as coming onto the team to talk a little bit more about the Durham experience. And Durham has definitely changed a little bit of their model from predominantly starting with home ownership, where a number of their portfolio now is rental. And that's because that's what the community has asked for, is more rental housing versus home ownership. So that's where their community land trust got deployed in the beginning to do home ownership to stabilize that community. And then over the years, the community has asked for more rental opportunities to come to their community, which again means that this model here is incredibly flexible. But other questions?
Well, I don't see any more questions and I don't hear anyone chiming in. So at this time, I'd like to again say thank you all for your attendance and your concern about affordable housing, and to let you know that the lack of affordable housing is not unique to the city of Greensboro, the state of North Carolina. It is inherent throughout the entire United States. And what we are trying to do is to establish a toolbox of resources for our community to have various options for permanent supportive housing. I'd like to also acknowledge many, I just looked through the participants, many of our counterparts here at the city have joined us to support, and we'd like to solicit you as being advocates and resources for people in the community that are interested in Community Land Trust Initiative, and to let them know that we are here and available to answer their questions. We also have another Zoom meeting scheduled for later on today at 6. So you're welcome to attend that as well. Share the information with other stakeholders who are interested in this initiative. And we look forward to continuing a positive dialogue and opening up the channels of communication. Again, I thank you and look forward to working with you all.